here shortly with a briefing on the F-22 program. They'll have a short presentation and then we'll take your questions on that subject. That'll go till about 4:05. We'll break the room for about 10 minutes, change slides, change briefers, and about 4:15 the Navy will start with the Admiral Fallon General Pace report on Vieques. Gentlemen.
Good afternoon. A couple of days ago, the Air Force was surprised by a HAC subcommittee mark that zeroed the procurement dollars for the F-22 in fiscal year 00. It's the F-22 is the Air Force's #1 procurement program, and I'd like to just run over about 4 or 5 slides with you for a few minutes, and then General Martin will entertain any questions that you might have. We think that air superiority is our job one. It allows us to fight outnumbered the first day of a war and win. It gives us the opportunity to face the entire enemy order of battle because we will deploy as an air expeditionary force into a theater and have to fight outnumbered. It enables all of the other things that we do in the air. It allows us to fight an information dominant type campaign, one that Joint Vision 2010 calls for, where we're free to use our AWACS, Joint Stars, rivet joint, U2, guardrail, in any way that we choose. They're free to roam the battle space and collect the information that we think is so critical to prosecute a successful air and ground and sea campaign. It shuts down because of the nature of the airplane. It will be able to shut down critical threats so that we can attack deep and strike critical targets the first day of the war. And it allows the in-theater disembarkment of forces. It allows us to use ports to conduct shallow water and littoral operations and prosecute all the other elements of a war that we think are so important. We did this very successfully in Operation Desert Storm. In fact, we neutralized the enemy Air Force in essentially the first few days of the war. We shot down 35 airplanes, destroyed another 200 on the ground. Within about 5 days, the command and control and the air defenses of Iraq were essentially down by 70%. Within 25 days, 85% of the supplies going to the Kuwait Theater of Operations from the north were cut off. And by the time the ground forces began operations, the Iraqi ground forces were their effectiveness was reduced by about 80%. Now, we did that because we had a dominant force in the air, the F-15. But the F-15 is getting old. It was born in the 70s. Right now, it's about 20 years old, the average age, and soon, about the time that we field in any numbers at all, the F-22, it will be 26 years old. And by the time we get a large number of F-22s to replace it, it'll be 30 years and over. So it's time to replace the airplane, because while we've been flying the F-15 and upgrading it, the threat has continued to evolve over time. This chart shows that in today's environment, if you match airplane to airplane, we're at near parity with the MiG-29, the Su-27, the airplanes that are deployed around the world in large numbers. And as we look to the near future in 7 or 8 years, the ability for a country with any sort of a budget at all can buy airplanes that will provide the F-15 with a very, very severe threat, and will lead to a situation where we can no longer guarantee that we'll be able to dominate the sky. So we think that the F-22 is the answer to this threat, and the F-22 has a series of characteristics which we think bring to the battlefield the capability to win and dominate both in the air and on the ground. Its stealth denies the enemy the ability to detect or track and successfully engage. Its ability to supercruise, when combined with its altitude, allows you to overfly a large number of the threats that would threaten a normal or a standard type aircraft. And it increases the range of our missiles and decreases the envelope of the SAMs. Now, along with this stealth and supercruise, the airplane has integrated avionics which allow us to be aware of the situation around us. You can see the the stealth signature of the airplane in the upper right-hand corner of the chart. I would just draw your attention to the lower left-hand corner where we talk about a conventional fighter and the opportunities of surface-to-air missiles to engage it. As you may or may not know, in Kosovo, over 700 surface-to-air missiles were fired at our forces. Now, we were able to evade those missiles successfully because of the countermeasures that we had at hand. The ability to do that in the future with new, more modern, what we call double-digit SAMs, like the SA-10 and the 12, will be less and less capable to do that. If we take a conventional fighter like the F-15 and slightly reduce its signature, which you can see up here in the upper corner, we get a slightly better performance against SAMs, but only slightly, and it doesn't significantly reduce the number of shot opportunities that a SAM has at us. However, when we put designed-in stealth like we have on the F-22 on an airplane, we get the ability to significantly reduce the number of shots. Then when we combine that with its ability to fly at supersonic speeds at extremely high altitudes and employ weapons both air-to-air and air-to-ground from that altitude, we get an order of magnitude decrease in the effectiveness of surface-to-air missiles. So in summary, we think that this combination of stealth and supercruise and maneuver dominate the threat in any air-to-air or air-to-ground environment. An F-15 or a reduced signature conventional fighter like an F-15X that some of you may have heard about is at a severe disadvantage in the near term. The weapons that we have on the F-22 will allow us to attack the first day of a war on the ground, significant threats and targets that would seriously jeopardize the enemy's capability to wage war. And we think that the mix of the F-22 and the Joint Strike Fighter provide a formidable force, just as the F-15 and F-16 have done up to this point. And that's all I have. I'd be glad to turn the time over to General Martin, who will answer any of your questions.
Stay up here because for those I have not had a chance to meet, I'm Greg Martin. I'm the Principal Deputy to Dr. Delaney, the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, and General Carlson is the Director of Operational Requirements. So between what our warfighters need and where we're going in the acquisition of this magnificent weapon system, we hope to be able to answer your questions. Yes, sir.
So how come you think you're having such a hard time convincing Jerry Lewis and others?
That's an interesting question. First of all, let me say that the majority of the discussion that we've heard so far, and the reason I'm a few moments late is I was just with Congressman Lewis and Congressman Dix, many of the HAC and HASC members explaining where we are with the program and the need for it. As we have gone through the development of this program, which really started in the early 80s, we have worked about every conceivable alternative, cost estimate, weapons capability, and modification or other alteration to airframe we can think of to make sure that what we're doing with this F-22 is absolutely necessary and important. And that debate has gone on for years. Most recently, the majority of the interest has been within the acquisition and cost profiles and the ability to bring this aircraft in on cost, and that's where most of the questions have come from. So we have fielded those questions, I think, quite well over the past year where there was great concern. There's been concern several years, but the last year particularly. And 3 of the 4 committees had, I think, as you know, marked this as the president's budget requested for approximately $3 billion. With the House Appropriations Committee, Defense Subcommittee, it appeared as if those were the questions that were being asked and of concern as well, and we had answered those. The concern, as you hear it, though, deals with the overall size of the budget for not only DoD but the Air Force, modernization, and current force structure needs. And there was a feeling that perhaps this aircraft could be paused because the threat was not immediately present, and therefore we could stretch the program somewhat and still make it available to our air crews as the threat began to evolve. Our concern with that is really twofold. First of all, the threat, as you saw a moment ago, depending on which country you face and how they choose to use their weapons, is here and present today. Second, rarely does stretching a program make it more affordable or more likely to deliver in the numbers to meet the need at the price that is affordable. So we have been, during this week, working with as many of the committee members as possible to make sure that they're aware of the threat and the contractual implications of such a slip.
General, you mentioned that you just, before this, were talking with the congressman. How much support have you gotten from OSD on this? I mean, has Dr. Gansler gone to bat for you guys to try and reverse this as well, or is this something you're fighting?
We have, I think, in fact, I think you'll see that the very first statement made by the Department of Defense was made out of OSD that I think it said something like they were shocked and very disappointed. And since then, their support and gathering of the detail and facts has been superb. We are working that with them. In fact, General Carlson has been with them most recently, and I think you will see as we go through this process, which is the process that delivers our weapon systems, it will get the fair hearing or fair airing and hearing that it deserves. And I think we will be able to convince people that not only do we need it, but that delaying it will cause very serious damage to the program.
General Martin, did you get any sense from your meeting with the congressman that they were swayed at all by what you said, or?
There are members who are swayed. There are others who are very, very concerned about the overall status of the budget to the need of our people and our modernization programs.
General, will applause in this case equate to a cancellation or kill of the program? Lewis says he doesn't want to kill it. He wants to pause so you reconsider. In this building and your service, would a pause equate to a kill?
Let me tell you the concerns that we all have here. When we structured the program originally in the mid-'80s, it was considered to be a program that would require about 750 aircraft. I think we went through the mayor as the Bush administration came on board, and that number was reduced to around the 650 number. As we went through the bottom-up review, the base force case and the bottom-up review, the number further went to 442. As we went through the QDR, the number of F-22s from the Air Force perspective went to 339, plus the option to go to 2 additional wings of F-22Xs, which would ultimately be a long-term interdiction aircraft or long-range interdiction aircraft to potentially replace our 117s, which would be aging out then, and our F-15E force. So it was thought that we could probably capitalize on the capability enhancements of this F-22 and augment it early in the campaign where we need the preponderance of air superiority force with the F-22X, and therefore we would actually buy more than the 442 that we're intending to buy. In fact, the numbers have been chalked against the 339. Rarely do you buy less and have price come down. Also, that always goes up. Now, while that's happening, our Lockheed Martin partners, and I must emphasize that we are in a very, very close partnership with this company and with their subs. They have worked with us over the last several years, but particularly the last couple of years, in a very, very close partnering team relationship that I cannot overemphasize how important that is, because this team is a magnificent team that is producing as they said they would. But there are some contractual obligations here that are of great concern, and they're brought about for this reason. As you pull those numbers down and guess your best guess and do your analysis and engineering and figure out what the new program will cost, and there's always the clock ticking away, usually the numbers are in 92 or 93 a little different than they show up at 95 as you begin to understand what the subcontractors really will ask for. So the numbers have tended to go up above what the early estimates were when we initially pegged the new number as the number of aircraft came down. So in order to make sure that we had a relationship that could make the subs to the Lockheed Martin and the Air Force and Lockheed Martin go forward, the contractual relationship is like this. When we let the long lead and then the contract award for the production representative test vehicles, 2 of them, and the long lead for the LRIP buy of 6 last December. The contract states that if we don't execute the LRIP buy at the end of December '99, then the PRTVs are canceled. At that point, our subcontractors are free to go out and do other things. They have been hanging loose here with this contract, expecting for the follow-on buys to occur. At that point, the technology that they're producing is not brand new. It's been there a while because we've been working and integrating. At that point, they very likely will either move on to other activities or come back for contract renegotiations. It's at that point that we will see what the cost implications are of a pause. I am very doubtful that we will get good news at that point and that this airplane will be able to withstand that type of a pause.
Can I ask General Carlson a question, please? Could you come in front of the mic, please? You said your opening statement, I believe, was that the Air Force was surprised. And I guess I'm curious, why was the Air Force surprised? Did this really hit you like a bolt out of the blue? Do you have any sense of why this all came up so quickly? And do you think that part of it could have been post-Kosovo and all of the Air Force public comments about how worn out it was after Kosovo?
First, let me state that we were, in fact, surprised. Dr. Hamry was surprised. I think the entire department was. All of the other subcommittees have given us a vote of confidence this year, and in fact, in the past, some of them have not. So we felt that we had educated them on the threat, on the need, and we felt like the airplane program was performing to spec. In fact, I think General Martin can tell you, can give you some idea of cost variance on the program, and we are performing, the team is performing magnificently. So we had pre-briefed some of the staff, and we didn't perceive these questions coming at us. So when the chief got the call, I think he was surprised.
Do you think that some of it is because after Kosovo, Congress wanted to do something about putting money into things like retaining pilots, people, readiness, all of that?
Well, I'm sure General Martin has just recently returned from there. Maybe he's got a feel for that.
Absolutely. They are very concerned about the state of our current equipment and the morale of our people. They know that our people have been worked very hard. They know they have performed well. They know that the equipment has aged at a greater rate with what we've asked of it. And they're very concerned about the overall top line of the DoD budget and the ability for us to continue to maintain the kinds of engagement opportunities that are important to this nation while we're also trying to modernize the forces that we have. And I think they've been very clear in that statement. So at this point, what we see is a shift from concern about the future to concern about the present. We here at Headquarters Air Force must be concerned about both. We are very concerned that without the F-22, we will mortgage the future of our air dominance capability while we fund the systems that we currently have and that we think will not be as capable as they need to be in the future. Yes.
One of the abiding concerns of this program is the state of the testing. You're still running way behind with the desired testing, as you're going to be buying production aircraft for a significant portion of the testing you've done. Was that issue brought up, and is there any improvement in the test schedule? And the other aspect, they're talking about one of the big arguments against F-22, no matter what the other aircraft that may be out there that we might run into, none of them would have the combined capability of an F-15 with a trained pilot and the synergism of our combined ops. So why do we need the advanced air?
First of all, with respect to testing, and then I'll ask General Carlson to talk about readiness and training and capability synergy. The flight testing, as you know, was of great concern last year. There were some marks in and language in the law that required us to complete a minimum of 183 hours before the end of the year. I think you also know they completed those hours a little over a month earlier, or earlier than anticipated. We have gone into the modifications we intended. We also know that there were a couple of structural issues that we had through our simulation and computer analysis determined could cause a problem. We took at that point the time to fix them, which put us a few weeks behind in the flight profile that we would like to have had. That has been rebaselined, and both aircraft are flying now and flying at a great rate. I think most of you know that those sorties are in the neighborhood of 2.5 to 3.5 hours, so they are accumulating a terrific number of test points. Additionally, there's a very important use of simulation to predict the results of each of these flight tests, and those simulations, as we validate the actual aerial performance, are spot on, which means the further we go in that environment, the better the chances that we will be able to see and understand before we have to fly what the results will be. So I think you'll find that the test profiles have proceeded quite well, and we're very, very pleased with that. Training.
On the question of comparable aircraft, overall systems and capabilities, not just airplane to airplane.
We are not quite as good as we were even just a few months ago. Our overall readiness rate in the Air Force is down around 74%. We are tired. We've had a large percentage of our crews deployed for an extended period of time. A large percentage of our crews are not trained to the level that they were just after Desert Storm, in that period just after Desert Storm. And if we go out and talk to the young kids that are flying our airplanes, the reason they like to fly them is because they are the best in the world and they're the best trained in the world. Now, asking a young fighter pilot to put his life on the line with a piece of equipment that is 26 years old doesn't make sense to us. We won't get F-22s in number until 2005, and we won't field a force that is capable of prosecuting a war until 2010 or about that time. Now, what that would be tantamount to is asking the people, as well trained as they may have been, to go into World War II with a SPAD, with a bi-wing airplane. And there's only so much that training and systems can do for you. We're not buying this airplane to fight a war in the year 2000. We're not even buying it to fight a war in 2005. We're buying it to fight and win America's wars in 2010 to 2030 or beyond. That's the period that we have to worry about. That's the period that we're concerned about, and that's why we want the F-22.
General Martin, did you make the point, or did it come up in your conversations, that here the Air Force really carried the bulk of this war in Kosovo, and this is kind of a slap in the face to the pilots and the Air Force people? This is their prime program. Do they have any sense of what that will do to morale, and how that will be perceived by the people who have to think about whether they're going to stay in the Air Force?
We have discussed those issues. I must tell you that the concern, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm not trying to side with them, but I'm trying to make sure that we don't turn this into some sort of an emotional argument and that we deal with the facts, is that the concern for the capability of the systems we have today and the morale of the troops and the funding that we need to sustain what we have today, in their view, is too thin. Our view, when we take a look at our overall budget priorities over the last 40 years, is that the program that we have crafted for the F-22, followed on by the JSF, followed on and including not only all of our space system modernization, but our bomber upgrades, is affordable and within the average procurement or modernization percent of our TOA that we have historically enjoyed. So we believe the program is well balanced. It is affordable. If you slip it, it begins to slip into the next ramp, and we begin to see very serious budgetary problems in the out years. So we think that the program that we've crafted and the one that this team is performing to is the one that we need to stay with. That's a very, very important statement. Now, with regard to the fact that it is the Air Force's #1 modernization priority and that the Air Force has been asked to prosecute 3 simultaneous combat operations, Kosovo, Northwest Asia, Southwest Asia, with its sister services, and its allies. Very important point. We're not doing this all on our own. We believe that the time is right for us to show those troops that we are interested and concerned about their welfare, their capability in the future, and that the F-22 is the right airplane for that, for today's modernization priority.
Let me follow up then. Is the Air Force prepared to say now that if the F-22 tanks now, you will not win 10 years from now if you're in war?
No, that's not what we are saying. What we're saying is we will not be able to achieve the level of air dominance that this country expects of it without casualties that it has become used to and demands, in casualty and attrition rates that it has become used to and demands of us. So we are going to put more people at risk by not having this kind of capability as soon as we can have it. Let me follow on with that for just a second. There's a lot of people that don't think the threat is really growing quite as fast as we're pointed out. The charts that General Carlson show you that there is great concern out there among other world countries about pushing the edge of technology. I don't have to remind any of you that there are countries out there that are stealing technology. There are countries out there that are taking the best that they can find and selling it all over the world. We're very concerned about asymmetrical warfare, the use of weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, nuclear. We're concerned about the Taepodong that's getting ready to be launched. We're concerned about where the China technology is taken. We're concerned about where cruise missiles will go. The longer a country has sanctuary, the longer they will be able to apply those forces against our forces as they close in the theater. The purpose of the F-22 is to march in and begin to take out those systems as our entire joint force closes and gets ready to accomplish the Joint Force Commander's objectives. When you don't have the systems that we think are necessary to defeat the enemy in minimum time, you put all those forces that we're closing into lethal range at risk. The F-22 accelerates the process for bringing to closure that war. So we increase the risks. I don't think we're going to lose the war in 2010. I just think we're going to see more people come home in body bags.
General Martin, you've got the full committee mark tomorrow. Are you optimistic that there will either be a modification, a change at all to Mr. Lewis's subcommittee mark on that? And related to that, have you spoken to Chairman Young or any of his staffers?
Either I or the secretary or the chief or the vice chief have worked as many of the staffs and principals as possible. Okay, so and without going into detail on who all we have talked to, let me just say we have worked that, and we've worked it, frankly, as quietly and as professionally as possible, because in the end, we don't want this to turn into some kind of an emotional argument. We want this to be a factual layout of the program and its need, so that we can let the process do what it's designed to do, and that's produce things for this nation that everyone agrees, or the majority agree, are appropriate. With respect to tomorrow's vote, I must tell you, I don't do vote counting, and I don't do the political process in this town, so I really am not in a good position to tell you what the vote will be tomorrow. We certainly hope that you will lay out some of the comments we're making here, and that they will be influential and have some effect on the members who have not yet engaged on this issue.
General Martin, you guys put out a fact point paper to the Hill the other day that talked about $8 billion cumulative cost increase. How much black magic is the figures? I mean, how solid are they?
Let me tell you, I've gone through that paper and looked at it very carefully, and I've asked them to adjust it to this number, all right? The effect of what the hack mark would do, we can account for immediately, about $6.5 billion. But if you were able to delay the program and keep it going, and that would probably result in about a 2-year slip, there would be a requirement to SLEP the F-15 force that would have to bridge the gap when they were supposed to phase out and the F-22 was supposed to take their place.
Explain what SLEP is.
Yeah, that's a service life extension program. We would basically have to make sure that we enhance the capability of the aircraft to live past its normal fatigue life. All right. Now, with that came some numbers about, well, we would probably, if we were going to do that, look very hard at enhancing some radar effort, and we would look very hard at some of its ECCM. And at this point, the Air Force has made no plans or decisions with respect to how much it would cost to do some sort of a service life extension program on the F-15. So I've asked that we pull that out and just categorize that as a SLEP cost to be determined. But the 6.5 shakes out like this. The EMD program would continue about 2 years longer. There's a group of capable engineers and test force people that would be continued beyond where they were designed to complete the program. We would have to take some of the engineering, manufacturing, development birds, the last 2 of them, convert them to the production quality birds so that we could do our initial operation test and evaluation, which the 2 PRTVs were going to do, and that overall is about a $1.2 billion bill. Then to renegotiate the contracts and get all the subcontractors and prime contractor back in line again to start moving forward would be an estimate of about $5.3 billion. A general rule of thumb is for every dollar you take out earlier in the program, you pay it back at about 3 to 1. Those numbers are pretty close to that.
Has OSD verified this or cooperated it?
We have been meeting with the men and women in Dr. Gansler's office over the past week, and those numbers are at this point receiving what I would consider to be an appropriate head nod. In other words, they're the best we've got at this point. You haven't gone out and done the renegotiation, but those are estimates.
Ladies and gentlemen, time for just 1 or 2 more, please.
General, the last 2 times that the United States has gone into battle, the initial suppression of enemy air defenses has been done by CALCOMs and TLAMs principally, the first few days of the war. You correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's certainly my understanding. It sounds like they're doing a mission now that is very similar to the mission you described for the F-22. If that's so, if I'm correct in that premise, then why do we need the F-22 in addition to what the CALCOMs and TLAMs do?
Well, very good question. Remember, the majority of the weapon systems that we are going against today, SA-2s, SA-3s, and SA-6s, have fairly well-established patterns that we understand. Many of them are fixed or very slow in their mobility. They can be moved, but they're not what you would consider to be transportable. Move, stop, open up, fire, and move again. The SA-10s, SA-12s, and you even find the SA-6 much more difficult to track down. Now the CALCOMs and the TLAMs program to a geographic coordinate, and in some cases can have some terminal guidance, but not a seek and find type of guidance, which means we will be targeting, unless we have perfect near real-time intelligence and targeting capability, we will be targeting a set of coordinates that no longer have a lucrative target under it. So we have to have both capabilities. We have to have the long-range cruise missiles to go against the known targets, primarily fixed, and we have to have the capability to seek and find those systems that are mobile, transportable, and more difficult to find that pose that threat to us. I think we found in Desert Fox that those CALCOMs and TLAMs hit the coordinates we asked them to hit. Unfortunately, the troops had moved or the missiles had moved. So we have to be, and we're not quite ready yet for the push-button war, where we know everything that's happening and we can react to it immediately. We don't, and therefore we have to have man in the loop to attack those kind of systems. The F-22 gives us the capability not only to take on aircraft, but take on SAM systems, mobile SAM systems come up, as well as fixed targets. Because of its stealth, its very capable speed in the supercruise arena, and the integrated avionics system.
339 aircraft that you talked about will be primarily air-to-air fighters. Primarily, that's what they're designed
Their primary mission will be air-to-air, but that has an inherent capability to carry 2 1,000 JDAM weapons in it and a very capable radar system that will help us be able to find the kinds of targets that we need to strike.
And just one other question. Given that Congressman Lewis, as we mentioned, does not want to kill the program, but wants the Air Force to take a pause and basically relook the whole program, particularly in terms of the fact that Kosovo, Iraq, some of those recent operations have not demonstrated a significant air-to-air threat, and the fact that the F-22 is a fairly large share of the Air Force's future procurement budgets, are you willing to say here today that if the committee gives you what you want, that you will in fact go back and relook at that issue? Because you used the word mortgage before. some of your opponents say the same thing, that so much is going towards the F-22 that you're in some ways mortgaging your future by putting so much money into one weapon system when we talk about asymmetric threats, non-conventional threats. Are you willing to go back and still look at that whole issue?
First of all, when we talk about putting so much into one weapon system, when you take a by-year amount for a limited number of years, that plays well. But the fact is that the F-16, when we were buying it, was in the $5 billion per year category. So we have spent that kind of money on one weapon system before, and will again as F-22s phase down and JSF phases up. Out of a $23 to $30 billion procurement budget, 10 to 15% of that budget may go at any one time for one system or another. During the C-17 primary build years, it was in the $3 billion to $4 billion category. So this is not the only weapon system that we are spending a lot of money on. And as some of our satellite systems begin to reach their time for launch, they are also in the relatively expensive category. So the question you ask, I think, has to be qualified by the fact it's not unusual for us to have a lot of money in one weapon system during certain phases of its life. And that's been a standard way we have programmed for 40 years. With respect to the comments that Congressman Lewis made in terms of taking a breather, the breather would be very damaging to this program. The look and the seriousness we'll be glad to look at any time and with anyone who asks us to do so. In fact, we do that every time we approach a milestone with assessment of alternatives and what you used to know as COIAs. So that's something that is a standard matter of practice. I think you know we're working that right now with Dr. Gansler and his office with respect to the next milestone. What would happen if it were going to bust the cost caps? What alternatives would you use? We're looking at that, just as Congressman Lewis is asking us to do. So that is ongoing. It's a matter of routine in the conduct of our acquisition programs, and I think that should play out.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.